The 2026 budget, also known as One Big Beautiful Bill, passed right before Memorial Day in the House of Representatives and is making its way through the Senate, with Majority Leader John Thune hoping to get it passed and on Trump's desk for signature before the July 4th break. A new Washington Post survey showing the bill is wildly unpopular, with 42% of Americans opposed, while only 23% support it. And 34% of Americans say they weren't following it close enough to have an opinion. Well, that 34% of Americans not paying any attention, that's the Republican Party's sweet spot. Those are the people you can lie to. You can insist to them there are not going to be any cuts to food stamps or Medicaid, and that the tax cuts pay for themselves. You can say the deficit is going to be decreased, and forget all that. It's transgender athletes we need to be worried about. So, as unpopular as this budget bill is, Trump and the Republicans are not scared because they know the alternative is even less popular. According to the latest surveys heading into next year's midterms, congressional Republicans are at least 10% more popular than congressional Democrats. So the Democrats have a problem, especially since their most popular leader isn't even a Democrat. He's a Democratic socialist who caucuses with the Democrats. That would be Bernie Sanders, who is the most popular politician in America. He's one of the few whose polling shows him above water, meaning more Americans approve than disapprove of Bernie Sanders. It's incredible. Donald Trump, 10 years of Donald Trump, he's never been above water. Bernie is, believe it or not, the most beloved politician in our country. And right behind him is Elizabeth Warren. Also up there are AOC and Coach Tim Walz. When Democrats play to the 99%, they win. It's why Bernie, along with 6 other Democratic senators, just signed a letter addressed to Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and Democratic National Committee Chairman Ken Martin, urging them to, quote, clean house, get rid of the billionaires, purge the party of wealthy donors. This letter, also signed by Senators Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, Chris Murphy of Connecticut, Jeff Merkley of Oregon, Peter Welch of Vermont, Tina Smith of Minnesota, Edward Markey of Massachusetts, and Chris Von Hollen of Maryland. This letter said that Democrats don't need to wait for Citizens United to get overturned in order to remove big money from politics. The Democrats, they say, can just stop taking it. Regain the trust of the poor, the working poor, and the middle class by funding their campaigns the way Bernie does, relying on small donors. That's the answer. That's how you combat the faux populism of fascism. You deliver real populism. But the Democratic Party leadership is not only run by millionaires and billionaires, it's also run by consultants and lobbyists who want to keep big money in politics because it makes them richer than they already are. Candidates for President, Senate, and House spent a combined total of nearly $15 billion in 2024. According to Anna Masoglia from the Brennan Center, close to $2 billion of those dollars was dark money, super PACs, where wealthy billionaires and corporations can donate to candidates anonymously so that there's no way to track the quid pro quo after their candidates get elected. The Democratic leadership thinks raising more money than the opposition is how you win. Well, last year, the Democrats spent $8.4 billion to lose the White House, the Senate, and the House of Representatives. Republicans won spending $1.6 billion less than the Democrats do. So what is the Republican Party's secret? They make promises they either keep or don't keep, but they make big, bold promises. You get elected by making promises, and if you can't keep those promises, you blame the other side. Promises define who you are. With the midterms just around the corner, Democrats are not going to win promising to protect Medicaid. Because Medicaid isn't some beloved government program like the VA or the post office. It's administered by the states, and most voters have no idea how Medicaid works. No, you win elections by promising to eliminate Medicaid. Get rid of Medicaid and replace it with Medicare for all. That's an unbeatable policy for the midterms. That's how you win. But the Democratic leadership wins, whether they win or not. They win, whether they're in charge or whether they're the opposition party, because they don't really have skin in the game. This is the Mop-Up. I'm David Feldman in New York City. Thank you so much for finding me. Please like this episode, subscribe to my channel and my newsletter, and leave a comment. If I make any mistakes, let me know. The Congressional Budget Office on Tuesday scored one big, beautiful bill and concluded what everyone has been saying since it passed in the House, and that is it will add $3.3 trillion to our national debt over the next 10 years while having little to no effect on growing our economy. Our current debt stands at more than $36 trillion. The Senate Finance Committee put out its version of the budget bill on Monday. So far, that's the most accurate representation of what the Republican Senate leadership wants this budget to look like. First off, they're asking for the debt ceiling to be lifted by $5 trillion instead of the $4 trillion the House version is calling for. So right there, they're admitting that renewing the 2017 tax cuts for the richest 1% will add to the debt. Meanwhile, they're convincing low-information voters that tax cuts pay for themselves, and the Congressional Budget Office doesn't know what it's talking about when it says this bill will add $3.3 trillion to our national debt. Well, if the Congressional Budget Office doesn't know what it's talking about, if this bill isn't going to add to our debt, I guess you don't need to raise the debt ceiling by $5 trillion. When it comes to Medicaid, it's starting to look like the Senate version of the budget bill is even crueler and more corrupt than the one proposed by the House. Lobbyists from United Healthcare and Humana succeeded in getting rid of the rules that would have cracked down on Medicare Advantage, which defrauds Medicare by billing for services never provided. Tell your grandparents, stay away from Medicare Advantage. The Senate version of the bill says in order to qualify for Medicaid, able-bodied parents of children 15 and older must now show proof of working 80 hours a month or 80 hours of performing community service. How about staying home and taking care of your kids? That sounds like community service to me. So 64% of Medicaid recipients between the ages of 19 and 64 are already working. The rest are either sick or taking care of a loved one. Work requirements for Medicaid has been tried in places like Iowa and Georgia, where they discovered the paperwork and administrative costs that come with enforcing these work requirements. It ends up costing more than just allowing people to go on Medicaid. The Senate bill cuts Medicaid spending by roughly $800 billion, although some Republicans want to cut Medicaid by $1 trillion over the next decade. But so far, it's $800 billion in the Senate bill, and they want to make it harder to apply for Obamacare, and they want to eliminate health care tax credits. The evil Congressional Budget Office estimated that if this bill passed, a total of 16 million Americans would lose their health insurance over the next decade. The Congressional Budget Office is also warning that work requirements will be the single largest factor in Americans losing their Medicaid. The Kaiser Family Foundation warning that new paperwork that will force Americans who already meet the eligibility requirements for Obamacare and Medicaid, this paperwork will result in millions losing their coverage anyway, even though they're eligible, but they'll lose their coverage anyway due to complicated, time-consuming administrative burdens. They said administrative burdens that are purposely being planted into this budget bill so you just give up and don't apply for Obamacare or Medicaid. We know how this works. If you create hurdles of cumbersome paperwork, most of us eventually give up. It's why my desk drawer is filled with rebates on electronic equipment, rebates I never found the time to collect. Well, Dr. Oz is the new Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services chief. On Tuesday, he endorsed the work requirements for Medicaid, calling the new budget bill, quote, the most ambitious health reform bill ever in our nation's history. Then he added, try some ivermectin. Dr. Oz said the new budget bill will eliminate fraud. What, are they going to get rid of Dr. Oz? He's the biggest fraud there is. He says the new budget bill will eliminate fraud, unless, of course, it's Humana or United Healthcare selling Medicare Advantage and then charging Medicare billions for services never rendered, right? You could say, you want to save money? Crack down on Humana and United Healthcare ripping off Medicare. Try that instead of work requirements for people who really need health care. Dr. Oz said he supports the work requirements for Medicaid because it guarantees that Medicaid, quote, will only be for the right people. The right people? And the wrong people? What do we do about them, Dr. Oz? Do we just let them die? Dr. Oz said Americans have to earn the right. This is what he said on Tuesday. He said, Americans have to earn the right to be on Medicaid. Health care, Dr. Oz, is a human right. You don't earn human rights. You are born with them. The Senate version of the bill, just like the House bill, eliminates the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act's green energy tax incentives. The difference with the Senate bill is it'll wait a full year before getting rid of them. The House bill gets rid of the green energy tax incentives immediately. The Senate bill fines any state that provides Medicaid to undocumented immigrants and prohibits Medicaid as well as the Children's Health Insurance Program from providing gender-affirming care. This doesn't save money. It's just sadistic. Senator Josh Hawley, Republican from Missouri, said he wouldn't vote for any bill that slashes Medicaid. Trump called him earlier this month and promised Medicaid would remain untouched. So Hawley said he would vote for the bill. But now, Josh Hawley, Republican, is looking at the bill coming out of the Senate Finance Committee, And he spoke again to Trump yesterday, telling him, quote, "There is nothing but pain for rural hospitals in this bill." Hawley, last week, he's a phony progressive. Last week, he introduced legislation raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. The bill is co-sponsored by Peter Welch, the Democratic senator from Vermont. Don't be fooled. Josh Hawley hates poor people. He introduced the bill to raise the minimum wage because he knows it's never going to pass in a Republican-controlled Senate and House, but now he has something to lay claim to that he can run on. The Senate version of the budget bill saves weapons buyers roughly $200 on the purchase of short-barreled rifles, short-barreled shotguns, and silencers by getting rid of the federal taxes on those items, federal taxes going all the way back to 1934 when Congress passed the National Firearms Act that outlawed machine guns, still on the bill. Still on the books. So they got rid of a $200 tax on purchasing silencers, short-barreled rifles, short-barreled shotguns. It has now become cheaper to buy a gun in America. And that won't drive up the cost of health care in our country. Only in America could there be a budget bill that makes guns cheaper but health care more expensive. This bill is being passed through a legislative process known as reconciliation, which means it's filibuster-proof in the Senate and only requires a simple majority. But reconciliation only applies to budget bills. The Byrd Rule, it's called the Byrd Rule, prevents senators from sneaking into a budget bill provisions unrelated to fiscal spending. Democrats say they will ask the parliamentarian to challenge this elimination of the gun tax in the budget bill since Democrats are claiming it violates the Byrd Rule. But Republicans are going to fight because they were sent to Washington to make money for the gun manufacturers. Well, on the subject of way too many guns in this country, Donald Trump was asked Monday if he planned to call Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, to express condolences or help after a state legislator and her husband were assassinated over the weekend in Minnesota. A Minnesota state senator and his wife were also shot but are expected to survive. So, are you going to call Tim Walz? Trump said, "Why would I call him? I don't really call him. I think the governor of Minnesota is so whacked out, I'm not calling him. The guy doesn't have a clue. He's a mess," unquote. Well, Trump didn't call Coach Walz, but he did call Pete Hegseth, our Secretary of Defense, several times to ream him out over the tone of his big military parade on Saturday. Trump accusing Hegseth of having no idea how to stage a military event. This from Donald Trump, recipient of 5 draft deferments during the Vietnam War. Trump is reportedly very unhappy with how his big military parade went on Saturday. According to Michael Wolff, who has written several great books about Trump, Michael Wolff speaks to White House insiders. They give him stuff that they give nobody else. And Michael Wolff is saying Trump, he was told, is furious that his parade on Saturday was joyous. He didn't want the soldiers looking joyous. He wanted them looking mean. He wanted them mean. Also, he complained the soldiers seemed to be marching out of sync. Wolff said Trump ordered his communications office to put the number of people showing up for his parade at 250,000, even though Michael Wolff says he was told by White House insiders the more accurate number for the parade, 40,000 people. Wolf said Trump blamed the parade, how bad it was, on his defense chief, Pete Hegseth, who was on the receiving end of several angry phone calls. Trump screaming and demanding to know, why didn't you order my soldiers to look more menacing? He said, I wanted them to look intimidating, not festive. And then Trump accused our soldiers of hamming it up, unquote. Wolf made these comments over at the Daily Beast. White House spokesman Stephen Chung then called Michael Wolf, quote, a lying sack of S-H-I-T. Chung added, Wolf is a fraud and a liar. You better be careful there, Stephen. You call Wolf a fraud and a liar, Trump could hear you and decide to hire him. Stephen Chung said Wolf has a sick and warped imagination and a severe and debilitating case of Trump derangement syndrome, which has rotted his peanut-sized brain. Chung then added, yum, peanuts. Well, it's all about the soldiers. Trump loves his soldiers. That's why he calls them suckers and losers. The Guardian reports one of Trump's new executive orders somehow allows VA doctors to discriminate against, and I'm not making this up, it's in The Guardian, discriminate against Democrats or unmarried people. I know, it's in The Guardian. The Guardian says doctors at the VA can now refuse treatment if a veteran is a Democrat, and the VA can refuse to hire a doctor if that doctor is a Democrat. The Guardian says the executive order signed by Trump also applies to dentists, psychologists, chiropractors, nurse practitioners, optometrists, podiatrists, licensed clinical social workers, and speech therapists who work for the VA. The Guardian writes that Trump's executive order states while the VA must treat all patients regardless of color, sex, race, and religion, at the same time, VA personnel can decline services to any veteran if you disapprove of any characteristics not explicitly protected by federal law, which means a doctor or somebody at the VA can refuse service to a veteran if they're a Democrat, if they're unmarried, or if they're a union organizer. That's according to The Guardian. That's what he's doing to our veterans because Trump loves our soldiers, the veterans, as long as they're alive, not wounded, or white. He said, I don't want any crippled people at my parade. It's depressing. And he calls soldiers buried in Arlington suckers and losers. And he's not too fond, as we know, of black soldiers. Charles Q. Brown Jr. was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff until Trump realized this year that Brown was black and committed the cardinal sin of speaking out against the murder of George Floyd. So Trump fired the general, claiming he was a DEI hire. And then, of course, he renamed all those Army bases after Confederate generals, even though Congress passed a law forbidding that. So this might explain why, for the first time in its 116-year history, the NAACP is not inviting the President of the United States to attend its annual convention. NAACP President and CEO Derek Johnson said Trump is not welcome. Johnson accused Trump of turning the U.S. military against the black community while signing executive orders that reverse decades of federal civil rights protections. Johnson also said Trump wasn't welcome due to his attacks on American democracy, as well as his unconstitutional executive orders that oppress voters. The NAACP convention is next month in Charlotte, North Carolina. This year's theme is the fierce urgency of now. This is the Mop-Up. I'm David Feldman in New York City. Please subscribe to my channel and my newsletter. Leave a comment, and don't forget to share this. Well, on yesterday's show, I told you about Don Jr. and Eric Trump introducing the new Trump mobile phone, which they promise would be made here in the United States. But the Wall Street Journal reporting that because the phone comes with processors, displays, and cameras that are only produced in Asia, it will be impossible for the Trump cell phone to be manufactured in this country. You mean he's lying? The Journal says one expert said that it would take 5 years for an American company to create an infrastructure of skilled workers who know how to produce something like a cell phone. The Journal added the phones Trump is selling are probably made in China. On yesterday's program, I told you that Donald Trump made a big announcement where he ordered ICE to stop targeting restaurants, hotels, and farms. But now it turns out Trump reversed that policy, and the Department of Homeland Security told ICE they are free to once again raid all those businesses. A Department of Homeland Security Assistant Secretary telling reporters, quote, Worksite enforcement remains a cornerstone of our efforts to safeguard public safety, national security, and economic stability. She added, quote, there will be no safe spaces for industries who harbor violent criminals. They're picking our fruit and vegetables. Drop that avocado. What? These are not dangerous people. ICE is dangerous. Well, California Governor Gavin Newsom mocked Trump's backtracking, accusing him of taking orders from Stephen Miller. Governor Newsom wrote on Twitter, quote, looks like Stephen Miller's the boss after all. Trump just got big-footed by his own staff. How pathetic. A federal appeals court heard arguments Tuesday to determine whether the California National Guard is controlled by Governor Gavin Newsom or President Donald Trump. The state of California took Trump to court last week after he ordered about 4,000 National Guard soldiers and 700 Marines to patrol Los Angeles, despite Gavin Newsom and Mayor Karen Bass insisting the troops were not just unnecessary, but their presence would inflame the situation. Trump sent them in anyway. A district court ruled that control of the Guard belongs to Newsom and not Trump. The Trump administration then appealed that ruling before the Ninth Circuit Court, which issued a stay on the lower court's ruling until a final decision could be made. A hearing was held on Tuesday. This case expected to go before the Supreme Court. Well, Trump sent the troops into Los Angeles, citing statutory authority given to a president in order to quell a rebellion. The lower court ruled that these protests in Los Angeles don't meet the threshold of a rebellion. So oral arguments were held Tuesday. During Tuesday's oral arguments, lawyers for Trump insisted the commander-in-chief has unreviewable powers to deploy troops wherever, whenever he decides. Lawyers for California urged Tuesday that Trump violated state sovereignty, and they said sending in the troops was an overreaction that prevents National Guard soldiers from doing important work that needs to be done right now in California, like preparing for forest fires. ICE agents on Tuesday arrested New York City's comptroller, Brad Lander, as he tried to shield an immigrant from being detained by ICE. The comptroller is one of the most powerful positions in the New York City government. There's mayor, there's the public advocate. Comptroller is up there. Masked ICE agents handcuffed and arrested Lander, the comptroller of New York City, accusing him of assaulting a federal officer and impeding law enforcement. Federal prosecutors say they will decide later on whether to charge Lander with a crime. Lander was released from jail after several hours. During his arrest, Lander reminded ICE agents that New York City is a sanctuary and ICE doesn't belong in our city. Lander has been showing up at immigration hearings quietly observing, and he told reporters after his arrest, quote, "I believe it is important to show up and bear witness." Lander, highly critical of human rights violations inside New York City's jail system, is running in next week's Democratic primary for New York City mayor on a progressive platform of police transparency, affordable housing, and green energy initiatives. New York Governor Kathy Hochul rushed to the jail after Lander's arrest. She was there for his release. Andrew Cuomo, the disgraced governor, former governor of New York, running for mayor of New York City against Lander, said of Lander's arrest, quote, "This is the latest example of the extreme thuggery of Trump's ICE, out of control. One can only imagine the fear families across our country feel when confronted with ICE or when their daughter is alone with Cuomo in a room." He didn't say that part, but not voting for Andrew Cuomo. Lander is not expected to perform well in next week's election. On yesterday's program, I told you about a new poll showing Andrew Cuomo, who is perceived as the front runner, a new poll showing Cuomo trailing Zohran Mamdani, the 33-year-old New York State Assemblyman who, besides being a Democrat, is also a member of the Democratic Socialists of America. Well, a new poll conducted by the Manhattan Institute now shows Cuomo poised to win next Tuesday, leading Mamdani 56% to 44%. That's a nearly 13-point lead. According to the poll, much of Andrew Cuomo's strength comes from black Democrats, with whom Cuomo scores a 23-point lead over Mamdani. This is the Mop-Up. I'm David Feldman in New York City. Thank you for finding me. Please like this episode so I remain in your feed. It's getting harder for shows like these to get out there, so please share this episode with your loved ones. Leave a comment if I made any mistakes. I want to know what you're thinking. I issue corrections. And let's turn to the Middle East. Israel now saying it controls the airspace over Iran, which, according to the New York Times, still has one of the largest armies in the Middle East, with nearly 600,000 soldiers. But Israel is more than 600 miles away from Iran, and according to the New York Times, in order to wage war on Israel, Iran needs more than ballistic missiles. It needs an air force to do serious damage. The New York Times saying that Iran's air force pales in comparison to Israel's. The Times reporting Iran began the week with 2,000 ballistic missiles, and so far it's fired approximately 400 at Israel. Israel has repeatedly attacked Iran's stockpiles of ballistic missiles, so some analysts are now saying, at best, Iran has 1,000 ballistic missiles left. Iran reporting more than 450 people in Iran have been killed so far by Israeli airstrikes. Israel saying so far 24 Israelis have been killed by Iranian airstrikes. 2,000 Israelis have been left homeless. Israel says Iran scored 35 direct hits on Israeli military facilities, an Israeli research university, one oil refinery, along with several homes. Iran confirming 11 senior generals have been killed by Israeli attacks. Trump declaring on Tuesday, we, the United States, now control the skies over Iran. And then Trump demanded an unconditional surrender. Trump adding, I know where Iran's supreme leader, the Ayatollah Khamenei, is hiding, but I'm not going to kill him for now. Trump then added, my patience is wearing thin. Trump saying, I'm not interested in negotiations. I want a real end to Tehran's nuclear program, a real end, not a ceasefire. Senator Bernie Sanders said Tuesday, quote, the Constitution of the United States is very clear. There is no ambiguity. It is Congress that determines whether we go to war, not the president. House members Ro Khanna, Democrat from California, and Thomas Massie, Republican from Kentucky, introduced a bipartisan resolution Tuesday demanding that before Donald Trump tries to commit troops to fight alongside Israel in its war with Iran, he must first get congressional approval. According to the Wall Street Journal, Thomas Massie is the only Republican signing on to this bill. 13 Democrats have already attached their name to it. On Monday, Senator Tim Kaine, Democrat from Virginia, Hillary's running mate in 2016, Tim Kaine, introduced a similar war powers resolution in the Senate. But State Department spokeswoman and former Fox News contributor Tammy Bruce Tuesday insisting only Donald Trump will decide whether the United States commits troops to Israel and joins them in their war on Iran. Tammy Bruce said, quote, he, Trump, is the singular guiding hand for what will be occurring from this point forward. I guess she's never read the Constitution. Senator Lindsey Graham, the Republican from South Carolina, telling reporters Tuesday he spoke with Trump and urged the president to assist Israel in destroying Iran's nuclear programs. But there are reports of a massive split inside the America First MAGA movement. Many supporters of Trump believed him when he promised no foreign entanglements, and now they're worried. Tucker Carlson accusing Israel of dragging America into a war. But Trump took to social media and addressed Carlson's complaints by calling Tucker Carlson, quote, kooky, and then adding in all caps, Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. Another MAGA podcaster with millions of followers, someone whose name I'm not going to mention, but he cautioned isolationism is one of the central pillars to the MAGA movement. He said it's right up there with tariffs and border security. He warned that should Trump get involved with Israel, it could spell disaster for Republicans next year in the midterms. Charlie Kirk, who runs Turning Point USA, he was a prodigious fundraiser last year for Trump. Charlie Kirk said, quote, no issue currently divides the right as much as foreign policy. As for Trump's immediate wartime cabinet, it's generally assumed J.D. Vance would prefer the diplomatic route. He's already said Trump should avoid military intervention in the Middle East that would end up being a disastrous repeat of America's past 24 years of foreign policy. Marco Rubio is Trump's Secretary of State and National Security Advisor. Over the past couple of years, as a United States Senator, he has been a hawk when it comes to Iran. He opposed President Obama's 2015 nuclear deal with Iran, where Iran agreed not to produce a nuclear weapon in exchange for America lifting economic sanctions. Trump pulled out of that agreement. In May of 2018, President Biden promised to renew the agreement with Iran the same way he rejoined the Paris Climate Accords after Trump pulled us out of those during his first term. But Biden never entered back into an agreement with Iran. So how close is Iran to having a nuclear bomb? Iran insists its nuclear enrichment program is solely for energy, but President Trump now claiming he agrees with Israel and that Iran had to be attacked because it's too close to getting a nuclear bomb. Aboard Air Force One, Trump was asked about his director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, testifying before Congress in March that Iran was years away from ever being able to produce a nuclear bomb. Trump said, quote, "I don't care what she said. I think they were very close to having nuclear weapons before Israel attacked." Well, after Trump said he doesn't care what Tulsi Gabbard has to say, Tulsi Gabbard told CNN that she agreed with Trump's assessment of Iran's nuclear capabilities. So what's going on? Is Tulsi Gabbard, our Director of National Intelligence, bending to pressure? Is she changing the truth to please Donald Trump? It's more complicated than that. She did testify Iran was years away from a nuclear bomb, but her testimony was a little more nuanced than that. So, as I reported on this show last month, America's entire intelligence community agreed that Iran ended its ambitions to build a nuclear weapon back in 2003, right after George W. Bush invaded neighboring Iraq. It was conventional wisdom inside our intelligence community, despite Donald Trump beating the war drum. It was conventional wisdom that Iran's nuclear bomb program was terminated back in 2003. I reported on this show that even our Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, testified that it's received wisdom among the 18 separate agencies that comprise our intelligence community that Iran is not making a nuclear bomb. We have 18 separate intelligence agencies, and they unanimously concluded Iran is not making a nuclear bomb. But according to the Wall Street Journal, Tuesday in the Wall Street Journal, Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard also testified in March that while she didn't believe Iran was building a nuclear weapon, she did express concern during her testimony that Iran's enriched uranium stockpile is now at its highest levels ever. According to the Wall Street Journal, Gabbard testified that such a highly enriched nuclear stockpile is unprecedented for a nation without nuclear weapons. And during her testimony, she warned Iran's uranium is becoming way too pure. So she was clearly sending somewhat mixed signals. That was back in March. Now, earlier this month, there was a shocking announcement from the UN's nuclear watchdog, the International Atomic Energy Agency. The International Atomic Energy Agency, early June, declared Iran had officially become non-compliant with their inspectors. Okay, this isn't Netanyahu, this isn't Trump, this is the UN's International Atomic Energy Agency. The International Atomic Energy Agency warned that Iran is enriching uranium way past the level necessary to simply power its reactors. The International Atomic Energy Agency warned, this was in early June, before Netanyahu launched the attacks. The International Atomic Energy Agency warned that no other non-nuclear country has enriched uranium to a level of this purity as Iran has. They also warned Iran is working secretly with fissile material that is quickly approaching weapons grade. This is the UN warning Iran's breakout time is now 1 to 2 weeks. Breakout time is how long it would take for Iran to enrich uranium until it's 90% pure. And when you get to 90% purity, that's enough for a bomb. So that's the UN. No fan of Israel's, no fan of America. That's the UN now saying for the first time, this is what the UN said, for the first time in 20 years, they are concerned Iran has gotten way too close to becoming a nuclear power. Well, I believe the UN. I don't believe Netanyahu. I don't believe Trump. I believe the UN. So just to remind you of the geopolitical tension at play here. Nobody in the Middle East wants Iran to get a nuclear weapon. I know some listeners don't think it matters, and I get that, but I'm giving you the lay of the land here. Russia, which borders Iran, doesn't want Iran to get a nuclear weapon. The entire European Union, along with Canada, Great Britain, and Japan, don't want Iran to become a nuclear power. Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Egypt, the Gulf states, China, while they might say they disapprove of Netanyahu's airstrikes, they have said explicitly they do not want Iran to become a nuclear power. Now, I read all your comments, and I know we have an international audience. And I know there's a contingent of listeners around the world and here in the United States who might actually be sympathetic towards Hamas, Hezbollah, as well as the Houthi fighters. Well, all three of those groups serve as proxy warriors for Iran. They get some of their funding and some of their weapons from Iran. So Iran, for better or worse, during the last 2 decades, has been accused of exporting regional instability, offering a geopolitical counterweight to Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the United States. The lay of the land is such that Israel is a pariah, and because of Gaza, among other things. But France was just about to recognize a Palestinian state this week, which would have been a major slap in the face to Netanyahu. But France postponed that declaration once Israel launched their attacks on Iran, because France doesn't want Iran to become a nuclear power, and France has officially recognized Iran as a source of instability throughout the Middle East and Europe. The new German Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, said of Israel's attacks on Iran that Israel, quote, is doing all the dirty work for the European Union. Now, he's not happy with what Israel is doing in Gaza, but Mertz, not a fan of Iran. He said, quote, Iran has brought death and destruction to the world with attacks, with murder and manslaughter using Hezbollah and Hamas, unquote. At the G7 summit this week, all the European leaders, including Japan and Canada, signed a joint statement declaring Iran, quote, the principal source of regional instability and terror, unquote. Leaders at the G7 summit just signed a statement saying Iran cannot have nuclear weapons. The European Union chief foreign minister said this week, quote, we all agree that Iran must never have a nuclear weapon. Lebanon's president, Lebanon's prime minister, both warning this week, telling Hezbollah to stay out of this and not to drag Lebanon into yet another war with Israel. The leader of Syria, a country once aligned with Iran, is remaining silent. Russia gets its Shahed attack drone technology, the equipment and source code of these drones from Iran. So one would think Putin would be concerned about Israel's attacks disrupting the supply chain. But new reporting in the Wall Street Journal on Tuesday saying that Putin paid Iran several $billions for the design of their drones so that Russia can now manufacture these Iranian drones domestically inside Russia. Russia purchased the license from Iran to produce the Shahed attack drones. So it no longer needs Iran to wage war on Ukraine. No longer needs Iran for their Shahed attack drones because now Russia can manufacture them domestically. So that's the lay of the land. Most European leaders privately, if not publicly, agree that Benjamin Netanyahu is a war criminal because of Gaza. Most European leaders are on the verge of declaring Israel a rogue state. But the attacks on Iran are changing that dynamic. Does Iran have nuclear capability? Or is Netanyahu using these attacks on Iran to burnish his and Israel's standing on the world stage? What do you think? Leave a comment. I don't know. I think both things maybe could be true. I don't know. As recently as a month ago, the United States intelligence agencies were certain that Iran's breakout time would be 3 years and that there was no danger of it becoming a nuclear power. Right? It would take 3 years for them to figure out how to get a bomb. But Israel, under Benjamin Netanyahu, has been itching to attack Iran for years. In the lead up to this week's attacks, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said his intelligence agencies were telling him Iran was not only close to producing weapons-grade uranium, but had also made advances in manufacturing the triggers necessary to detonate a nuclear weapon. So you have to get to about 90% purity with the uranium, and then you need to figure out some trigger mechanism. As Houthi fighters in Yemen fire missiles into Israel, Netanyahu insisted that Iran, which uses the Houthis as proxy fighters, primarily against Saudi Arabia, but now Israel, Netanyahu warning that Iran would have no problem giving the Houthis a nuclear-tipped missile to launch at Israel or Saudi Arabia. The problem, of course, being that if you drop a nuclear bomb on Israel, 20% of the country is Palestinian. So you're going to be killing Palestinians as well. That's the problem with people warning about Iran having a nuclear weapon. The Washington Post reporting U.S. intelligence agencies told Netanyahu before he launched the attacks on Iran that there was no evidence to support his claim that Iran was preparing to give the Houthis in Yemen nuclear-tipped missiles. So, according to all the reporting I'm looking at, Iran's nuclear bomb-making capability ultimately resides deep down inside its underground Fordo facility. The Fordo facility. The International Atomic Energy Agency, that would be the UN, back in March of 2023, reported, they do the inspections, they reported that Iran had enriched uranium up to nearly 84% inside Fordo. Remember, it becomes weapons grade at 90%. So, what is Israel thinking? What is Trump thinking? What is the G7 thinking? The general thinking is unless Fordo is destroyed, Israel runs the danger of all of this backfiring, that the bombing of Tehran will force Iran into thinking the only way to stop these missile attacks is by getting the uranium up to 90% and then proving to the world we have the ability to launch, at the very least, a dirty bomb into Israel or Saudi Arabia. So it all comes down to Fordo. That's according to the research I'm doing, according to the people I'm talking to. Fordo. If Israel cannot take out Fordo at the risk of spewing radioactive material into the air, it is more than a mile underground, underneath a mountain, but still, if they cannot penetrate Fordo, Iran's nuclear weapons program theoretically could go into overdrive, and they could succeed in getting either a nuclear weapon or a dirty bomb, and then Israel, nobody can attack Iran. Then it's a different ball game. So Fordo is deep inside a mountain, way down deep underground, and according to all the reports I'm seeing, Israel doesn't have the weaponry to penetrate Fordo. The United States does. It's called the Bunker Buster, 30,000 pounds. The Bunker Buster, or the Massive Ordnance Penetrator, or the GBU-57. And we have it. Israel doesn't. In order to drop a 30,000-pound bunker buster, you need the B-2 stealth bomber. Israel doesn't have a B-2 stealth bomber. So this is the inflection point. Will Bibi Netanyahu talk Donald Trump into getting our Air Force to fly a B-2 stealth bomber over Fordo and drop a bunker buster? Then we're at war with Iran. As I said on yesterday's show, at the beginning of every war, it's always a cakewalk. We're being assured that Iran is isolated, and can be easily defeated. We were told the same thing before we went into Afghanistan, before we went into Iraq, before we went into Vietnam. Netanyahu, before he went into Gaza, was told the same thing. It's always a cakewalk walking in. It's a quagmire getting out. Will Congress invoke the War Powers Act? Will they demand a war authorization before Trump drops the bunker buster? And finally, we have money for bunker busters, but if you want Medicaid, you're going to have to work for it. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. Thank you so much for listening to me. If you enjoyed any of this, please share it. Please like this so I remain in your feed. Subscribe to my channel, please. Subscribe to my newsletter. Thank you to Bob and Mila in the chat room for keeping the conversation civil. I think that covers everything. Leave a comment. Thank you for listening. I'm probably going to do a show tomorrow. There's a lot going on. Thank you.